So let me welcome, Professor Martin Bichler from the Technical University of Munich, Germany, with the entry combinatorial exchanges for trading fishery access rights.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Neri, judges of the Wagner Prize Committee, it's a great honor to be here. So this has been, what I'm going to present has been the results of a 3-year, almost 4-year project, a very intense project about the design and implementation of a combinatorial exchange for trading fishery access rights. As always, I'm standing here on behalf of a larger team. So there has been a whole group of people doing regulatory work, supporting the stakeholders at the Department of Primary Industries of the Government of New South Wales. Our key contact point and the project lead at the Department of Primary Industries was Doug Farrell. He unfortunately couldn't make it today due to circumstances beyond his control, but he's with us in a video message towards the end. Another member of the core team is Jakob Goré. He's a very well-known microeconomist, used to be at Caltech, now moved to NSW. Vladimir Fuchs, postdoc in my group, and I myself, I'm at the computer science department of the Technical University of Munich, also affiliated with the School of Management, and I teach OR. So let me start out with the key motivation and the underlying problem that we are trying to address, which is overfishing. And this is something that probably you all have heard about. About 15 years ago, a number of statistics surfaced, which are very worrisome. So this is taken actually from 21st century challenges. It says 87% of the world's fish species are either exploited, overexploited, or have collapsed. It sounds very dramatic. As a matter of fact, it is. I was asking Doug, and he was telling me it's 30% that are overexploited and have collapsed. So the last two categories, and those are the ones you really need to worry about. And all of those need strict fishery management plans. So when these studies came about, of course, you can imagine there was a huge pressure on policymakers to do something about it. And the primary tool, policy tool, to combat overfishing turns out to be cap and trade. So in the language of fishery management, this is called Catchshare systems. So the idea is you determine a sustainable level of the fish that you can take from the seas every year, and then you allocate shares to the fishes, and those will be tradable. Right? And only last year in Nature, there was a paper coming out by Birkenbach, who did a very extensive study on fisheries, fishery industries who did catch share systems and the ones who did not. And they showed convincingly that it is an amazingly effective tool to combat overfishing. So many of the fish stocks could be recovered. But in the very same issue, there is a very important commentary by Rosenberg, and that might answer your question, why don't all of these fisheries use catch share systems? Well, the allocation of catch shares turns out to be a really challenging policy problem. Right? So in the language of Al Roth, the Nobel Prize winner in market design, who gets what and why? And this has to do with at least two problems. The first problem is, how do you allocate the shares initially? And the second is, there is a regular need for reallocation. So you need exchange markets. And that's essentially the type of problem we are looking into. All right? So New South Wales is a case in point. This is a fairly large commercial fishery industry. They harvest around 15,000 tons of fish annually, worth around $80 million. There were, in 2016, around 1,000 commercial fishes, a bit more, and 100 share classes. So what is a share? To give you an example, it is the volume of fish that you, so like a ton of sardines that you can fish in a particular region in that year. So these shares were distributed either evenly or via grandfathering, so based on historical catch, between 2002 and 2007. And finally, at the end of this procedure, the shares should become binding. So in the sense that you must not fish more than the shares that you have allocated. And it turns out in 2017, when the shares should become binding, the allocation of catch shares did not fit the original distribution of shares anymore, right? So If you consider the level of fish that was caught in 2016 as the efficient level, then a number of fishes would have been restricted severely. In particular, there was an almost Piketty-like curve where like 20% of the fish are very effective and they do 80% of the fishing. And it's these fishes who were hurt the most, right? So, and it was clear if you did not reallocate these catch shares, then this would be a severe problem, in particular to the most effective fishes, and you could really jeopardize the fate of this whole industry. So, at first sight, it might seem like, well, just let them trade, right? So, actually, that was what it's meant to be. So, you allow fishers to trade these shares, and there are a few fishers who are in need of shares, others who might want to sell, who are less effective. So, why wouldn't they just trade? And there are a couple of reasons why this did not happen, at least not to the level that was necessary. So first of all, there are 1,000 fishers, and you need to understand which of the fishers would like to sell, which would like to buy, and what are the share classes they own. But even if you identify the right fishers who would, provide you with the shares that you need, for example, then it's far from obvious how you negotiate, because there is no anchor point. So there is a huge value uncertainty, what the worth of these shares really is, right? And last but not least, there was a large need for buying and selling packages. There are complementarities, and I'll get to that point on the next slide. So the original proposal that was put on the table by the government was the so-called buyout proposal. The buyout proposal essentially says, well, the government takes 16 million Australian dollar, and it just approaches the fishers in a tender and buys out shares that fishers don't need anymore. There were a lot of fishers that wanted to exit the market, actually, right? The problem with this proposal was, well, it was far from obvious that this would lead to an efficient allocation then, so that the fishers who are in need of new shares would get the right number of shares at the end of the day. So, and if you participate in this tender, then you win a particular exit grant, and then you're supposed to either retire the shares or sell the shares. But again, how do you find buyers, and so on and so forth? So many things were unclear, and in particular, these complementarities mattered. So again, as I was saying, there was a number of fishers who wanted to leave the market, and they wanted to sell their whole endowment, not just parts of it, because if that would happen, they would be less effective than they already were. And at the same time, if you start fishing in a new region, for example, you want to make sure that you get a certain number of shares such that fishing is viable in this region for you, right? So allowing for package trades was considered quite essential, and that was not guaranteed. So at that time, the fishery industry was in uproar, and the media was full of news coverage about angry fishermen who were really worried about their future in a way. And it was also clear that this reallocation was really necessary from a policy point of view just to have a healthy industry, right? You don't want to ruin, you don't want to restrict your most effective fishers. So that was about the time when we got to talk to Doug Farrell, and we came up with a design that we finally implemented and organized of a combinatorial exchange, an exchange that would allow buyers and sellers to trade packages of catch shares, right? We actually organized preview market. So this was a larger exercise, you can imagine. There are 1,000 fishers that you need to educate about these new possibilities and this market mechanism. So we did a lot of educational material. So we provided a number of videos. I'm going to show you one of those that should give you an overview of what has actually been done and what the nature of this market was all about.
The subsidized share trading market will help you buy and sell shares so you can adjust your business to the new share linkage arrangements. To give you more information about the subsidized share trading market, a preview trading market will be held before the real trading begins early next year. To participate in the preview market, you'll need to register and set a secure password. You'll receive updates such as when the preview market is due to open via email and SMS. Each round of the preview market will be open for 1 week, during which you can view and change your bids and offers as many times as you like. Once each round closes, bids to buy and offers to sell will be electronically and anonymously matched. If enough matches are made, the preview market will close, but it is likely that up to 3 rounds will be required. you'll be advised after each round of the outcome and whether another round is required. You must submit at least one bid or offer in each round to participate in following rounds. When you can update your previous bids or offers, leave them active or add new bids or offers. When you first log in, you will see all fishing businesses registered to you and their current shareholdings. To bid, to buy, or offer to sell shares in individual share classes, choose the Buy/Sell Specific Components option. Then select Buy or Sell and enter the number of shares you'd like to trade. If you want to buy shares, you can enter a range from the minimum to the maximum number of shares you're willing to buy. Entering a wider range increases your chances of being successfully matched with a seller. If you need to sell shares, you only enter the total number you're offering for sale. Next, enter the price you'd like to buy or sell shares for. If you're buying, this will be the maximum price you're willing to pay per share. If you're selling, it will be the minimum price per share you are willing to accept. To offer to sell all shares associated with a fishing business and cancel the fishing business number, choose the Package Offer option. Enter the minimum price you're willing to accept for all the shares, and if all your shares are successfully matched with buyers, you'll receive the selling price of the shares plus a $20,000 fishing business buyout payment. If a Southern Fish Trawl endorsement is cancelled along with the business, you'll receive an additional $20,000. Once the preview has concluded, you'll be notified of the final outcomes and the amount you'll be due to pay or receive if the preview had been binding. Remember, the preview trading period is an opportunity for you to better understand the subsidized share trading market, but it is an exercise only.
All right. I think that should give you a bit of an overview of what this market was all about. And now put yourself into the shoes of those who get to design the market. And there are a couple of probably obvious questions. The first one is of a computational nature. So the underlying allocation problem, even assuming complete information, is an NP-hard packing problem that we had to solve. And the size of the problem was such that when I started out doing this, I was far from confident that we could solve this even to near optimality. So this had around 100,000 participants, up to 1,000 participants, and 100 share classes. This is how it had to scale. And on top of this, and this will become a little clearer when we move on, we had tight time constraints because we had to compute different scenarios. I'll talk about this more in a minute. But this put constraints of a few hours on us in which we had to solve the problem. The second bunch of problems that we were facing were of an economic nature. So the point is, how do you compute prices on such markets? And as a matter of fact, pricing on combinatorial exchanges is not well understood. And in the context of this project, we got to do a lot of theory work, which is interesting because much of the theory here is very OR-ish, if you would like. So it really draws a lot on duality theory, on linear and integer programming. I think we pushed the boundaries on that end to some extent. If that was not enough, there was some work on pricing in exchanges, of course. One of the challenges that we faced was that we had to distribute a subsidy endogenously. Right? So typically you look for budget balance on these markets. Here it was the opposite. So essentially the Department of Primary Industries and the minister, they were very hesitant and they were worried that people would not participate, right? So think it just about it that way. There is a small proportion of fishers, they were in need to buy. There's a larger proportion of fishers who want to sell, but this is a low margin business. They might be budget constrained. The net present values are potentially very high, so they might not afford to participate. But if the buyers would not agree to participate, also the sellers don't show up and so on and so forth. So essentially the result was, well, let's use the 16 million that were essentially meant for the buyout option and use them to provide a discount on the market price for the fishers who really need these shares, the ones who had historically caught very high and are now restricted. So we call that a share deficit, right? And they should benefit from the subsidy. So they should get a discount to the market price. And that led to a lot of added complexity, and there was essentially no literature on how to do that. All right, so let me first talk about pricing. So if you think back to your grad school days, you might all remember general equilibrium theory and beautiful theorems by Arrow and Debreu, the welfare theorems that would suggest that markets can solve complex distributed resource allocation problems. So the welfare theorems, a bit reduced, would mean a market will tend to a competitive equilibrium that is weakly Pareto optimal, and every Pareto efficient allocation can be supported as an equilibrium by some set of prices. And what they mean here are indeed valuation prices. This means linear and anonymous prices. It's the same price for each share class, and linear means for each share class, anonymous means it's the same price for all of you, right? And you could always find those. Unfortunately, this theory hinges to a large extent on the assumption that goods are divisible and that preferences are convex. So, and both are violated. And you might now ask, why would it be so difficult to find prices on such markets? Let me give you a little example to just make the point. So this is a small example where we have one seller and three buyers. And these are the valuations for different packages. And there are three objects, A, B, and C, that are being sold. So we assume here the seller has no valuations for the good. And the welfare maximizing trade would be to sell the package A, B, and C to buyer 3 at 41. So all the other bits would be losing. So if we were to look for linear and anonymous prices in the way I defined it, so these prices would be higher than these losing bits. So more than 15 for A, B, and C, and at the same time less than 41 for the package, which is just not possible. So there is actually some beautiful theory that really draws a lot on competitive equilibria, on duality theory essentially, and on complementary slackness conditions, and equates that to competitive equilibria on such exchange markets. And the learning from this is that the only types of prices that would always clear the market are non-linear and personalized. So you get, each of you gets a different price even for the same package, right? So it's even worse than that, actually. So suppose we are now in an exchange setting where you don't only have a single seller, but three sellers for the three objects. Then you can construct out of this an example where there are no competitive equilibrium prices. There is no price where not as any subcoalition could deviate. So there's always a subcoalition that could walk away and make themselves better off. So it's not a core solution, if you would like. Beyond that, we also did a bit of work on, more recently, on looking into budget constraints, which is actually motivated by this very market, because these buyers were heavily budget constrained. So how would you compute competitive equilibrium prices if you had budget constrained buyers? And it turns out, even in this complete information world, you face a very hard computational problem, actually a problem that is sigma to p complete, so one level up in the polynomial hierarchy to the type of NP complete problems that we are used to in many of our projects. So there's a lot of theoretical considerations and properties that you would want to like for these types of markets and the types of prices that I'm talking about. It turned out that the number one design desideratum that the stakeholders were really interested in was a level of fairness. A level of fairness that we actually didn't find so much in the economics literature at that point, which would essentially boil down to linear and anonymous prices. So the observation that there might be two fishers who sell the same package and they get vastly different payments, that was considered totally unfair. Right? And at first sight, that might be puzzling. So why would that matter? As a matter of fact, there is one other bigger application of combinatorial exchanges. These are day-ahead electricity markets, where you also have block bids. And guess what? What is being chosen as the pricing rule are linear and anonymous prices. So what is the downside? The downside is it might go against efficiency, against maximizing gains from trade. So let me give you a little example just to make the point. So suppose you had a seller who is selling two identical items as a package. And then you had one buyer who is willing to pay $10 and another buyer who is willing to pay up to $26. The seller wants $30. So there are obviously gains from trade if you have let them trade. But if you enforce linear and anonymous prices, you cannot charge more than the $10 because otherwise buyer one would make a loss. And that would lead to no trade in this example. So the question that arises is, well, is this just a small contrived example, or can these types of strong inefficiencies and welfare losses actually even happen in larger exchanges? Yeah. So there is a fair amount of literature in economics that suggests that if the markets grow large, the non-convexities go away. Right? We actually took this very example, this small example, and extended this and came up with a probabilistic model. And one of the theorems in that paper was that suppose we have a multi-unit market as the one that we've seen with one seller selling a package of k units and n unit demand buyers, and the valuations are drawn from the same distribution, then the expected efficiency loss can actually be bounded by k minus 1 divided by n plus 1, where n is the number of bidders and k is the size of the package. So this means if the number of bidders grows, it suggests that the inefficiencies go away. And we did a large number of simulations and numerical experiments. The good thing was we had very precise data about what the individual fishers owned, what their revenues were, and so on and so forth. So we could do very precise simulations. And also there we saw a pattern that, well, if the fishers participated to a large extent, the efficiency loss would be in the order of 3, 4, 5%, which was considered totally acceptable. So the question is now, how would you compute such prices? Let me give you a sketch and an idea of what is going on. So in the objective, we want to maximize gains from trade. So essentially, on the left-hand side, this is what the buyers are willing to pay, and this is the quantity that they get on the right-hand side. So those are binary variables for packages that are being sold and the ask prices. And you want to maximize the difference. This is like the classic objective function. And then you have a demand-supply constraint. Of course, you cannot buy more than what is being sold on this market. And then you have a couple of constraints on the prices. One of the constraints would be budget balance, for the sake of it here. So this means what is being paid should go to the sellers. And then you have individual rationality constraints or no losses. So the winning sellers should get at least what they asked for, and the winning buyers should not have to pay more than what they bid, right? Unfortunately, it was not that easy. So the problem that I alluded to a little earlier was the subsidy that had to be distributed endogenously. All right. So again, there was this small group of fishers who were in heavy need of more shares, and the minister wanted to help them, right? And set incentives that they actually participate in. They reveal their demand, their real demand on this exchange. But essentially, since they were budget constrained, you want to lift these budget constraints to some extent and pour this subsidy into the bids of these buyers, such that they could actually buy the shares that they need. And that was the ultimate goal of the market, to redistribute the shares to those who actually need them. So this overall endogenous distribution of the subsidy led to a lot of additional complexity in the back end that I can't go into all the details, but you have it in the paper that you have available. Overall, we ended up in a very large-scale mixed integer programming problem. We had around 6,000 variables, many of those binary, around 10,000 constraints, used the branch and cut solver, actually different ones, and used a lot of computational tricks that I can't go into due to the time constraints. Custom branching priorities, combinatorial benders, cuts, and whatnot to make it tractable. And actually, at the end of the day, the very last round, we could solve to optimality on a compute cluster. The project had substantial impact. So close to 600 commercial fishers participated, and that was way more than what was originally expected by the ministry. They placed 740 buy bids, 432 sell offers, and an additional 107 sell-side package offers across different share classes. In total, 36,000 shares got traded. And what is now important, 95% of the buy bids in the central share classes that really mattered, those could be satisfied in this market. So in total, a vast majority of active fishers in need of shares won a sufficient number. And of course, we got quite a bit of press coverage that I also won't go into in detail. We were very happy that after an extensive period of evaluation, the minister came out in a public statement, and he sent us a letter that you all have available, where he writes, for example, "I feel very confident in stating that we have been able to achieve a result for the taxpayer of New South Wales and the shareholders in the commercial fishing industry that is far beyond what any traditional approach to industry reform would have achieved." What I like about the project, it sounds like a very idiosyncratic problem that they had. It is not. Right? So there are hundreds of fisheries that already use Catchshare systems, and there will be more. And reallocation is a problem that arises quite frequently. In particular, think about climate change. There is often a need to tighten the caps substantially, such that reallocation of catchshares is just necessary. And you want to have market designs, you want to have optimization models that are available and can be used for these types of reallocations. Let me end this with a few take-home messages before I let Doug Farrell speak in a video message. The first one is we claim our market design provides a template solution to an entirely new problem that can readily be applied by other fishers as well. Second is, and I think that's what made me excited about the project, in many other projects in OR, we are mainly focused on the computational aspects. And its speed, its scalability, that's what we worry about a lot. So here comes a domain with a lot of new design desiderata, economic design desiderata. We were talking about things like stability of the outcome, fairness of the prices. We might even talk about incentive compatibility. And it's exciting to understand how can we implement this in math? How can we implement this in the right optimization solution to achieve at least some of these economic design desiderata? And this opens up a really new field of market design at the very intersection between operations research and economics. So by and large, I think environmental market design, but probably market design overall is an important growth area for operations research. And I claim not only in the application, but also in theory. So let me maybe, towards the end, I think I have a few more minutes, let Doug Farrell speak. 4 more minutes, that should work. And he would give his message and his summary of the project. We had to tape this just before I left. So let me see how this works.
Hello, my name's Doug Farrell. I'm a director in the Fisheries Division of the New South Wales Government, and I was the government representative on the market project team. I wanted to comment on behalf of the government about the impact of the project and why we view it as such a success. The government's reform program is aimed at improving long-term viability of the commercial fishing industry in our state. However, the existing rights to those fishing activities were initially misallocated, and it was preventing adjustment. We needed to do some sort of adjustment or reallocation program. We looked at a wide variety of the standard approaches commonly used elsewhere. We were very intrigued by the potential offered by a combinatorial market. You might imagine creating a purpose-built market with unfamiliar features for use by commercial fishers, create some challenges and risks. For the government, our politicians and our senior executives were also initially nervous about trying to meet the needs of buyers and sellers, but also meeting the government's policy objectives. We took the measure twice, cut once approach and did very extensive testing and eventually got everybody on board and understanding the project, how it worked, and confident in it. The government's extremely happy with the outcome. The insensitive share classes where not achieving your share purchase effectively meant you had to stop work. We got 95% of those buy bids met. We're really confident the market delivered excellent value for money to New South Wales taxpayers. The project set out across a range of objectives and achieved them all in a way that really couldn't been done in any other way without vastly higher expenditure. So our Minister, Niall Blair, has relayed his sincere thanks to all involved, and we're very, very happy. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Doug Farrell. I'm Director in the Fisheries Division of the...
Okay, wrong button.